there. Today, I'm going to show you how to rip your old physical PS2 game discs to digital ISO format so that you can preserve your games or emulate them on newer, non-stock hardware. We're going to be doing this on my PC running Kubuntu Linux, so if you have a Windows computer, you may want to find another tutorial using ImageBurn or another similar application, as the K3B program that we're going to be using today can't be installed on Windows machines. All that you will need for this job, besides your PC of course, is a disk drive, the K3B app, a normal PS2 game disc in good condition, and an external storage device, unless you plan to save these files directly on your computer. As long as your game can be played on a PS2, you shouldn't have any issues ripping it to digital format using this method, with the exception of blue discs. Obviously, if the game is scratched or has a hard time running on a PS2, you should probably try resurfacing your disc before attempting this process. So to begin, you'll want to find and install the K3B program. As with all Linux programs, this can obviously be done through the terminal, but fortunately for those who aren't confident with or adept at terminal navigation, it is also in the Ubuntu Software Center, shown by this icon right here. Simply open whatever version of the Software Center was included with your Linux distro. In my case, that will be the Discover Software Center. Search for K3B. And follow the installation prompts. Very straightforward process. I've already got it installed on my PC, so we'll just fire it up here. What you see on my screen may be slightly different from what you have, but the process will be the same for all Ubuntu-based Linux distributions. Worst case scenario, you can always install K3B using the terminal, but if you've got an Ubuntu-based Linux distro installed on your PC, you should be able to point and click your way through the installation without the need for terminal commands. You can also find the K3B app in your Start menu or Apps list. In my case, it's under the Multimedia tab there. When you fire it up, you'll be greeted by this relatively simple layout. To begin the dumping process, select Copy Medium right here. And then in the window that opens, select the Only Create Disk Image checkbox. I also select the Verify Written Data checkbox there at the bottom as well, just to double check that the dumped files were correctly copied and match what was on the disk, but that isn't completely necessary. Then, if we open up the Image tab in that same window, we can see that both what the file will be saved as and where it will be saved to. You can see that the path is Videos folder on my PC. And if you're okay with the predetermined location, you don't have to change this, although you'll probably want to change the name of the file that you're saving, as the default name is usually an abbreviated version of the game, or the generic K3B disk image name, as we can see here, and that would be hard to remember. So in my case, I want this file to be saved to the SD card for my handheld emulator, so I'm going to navigate to my SD card, select my PS2 games folder, and you can see all the other games that I've ripped here as well. Lastly, I'll change the name of the file to the game that I'm ripping, in this case, Soul Calibur 2. Make sure that you leave the .iso extension on the name of the file so that your emulator knows what kind of file it is and can run the game. And then click Save. Take note of the size of file here on this window before we click Start, as we'll reference back to this in a little bit. Alright, there we go. So now the dumping process has started, and we can leave this alone for a few minutes while it does its thing. This is usually a pretty fast process and shouldn't take much longer than roughly 10 minutes for all except very large games. As I mentioned earlier, this process does not work with PS2 blue discs. I have a few, most of which are actually in better overall condition and have less scratches or other damage than many of my other normal PS2 discs, but despite the good condition of my blue disc games, every one of them ran into errors and either caused K3B to crash or just outright failed during the dumping process. For good measure, I did try changing the K3B settings to skip errors in the hope that it would be enough to help it power through the problems that it was having, but that did nothing except create a string of errors until it eventually just failed again. I have seen other people online stating that they had the same issues, even down to the exact amount of progress that was made during the dumping process before an error message popped up in the case of Star Wars Racer Revenge. Because of that, I'm fairly confident that the issue is related to elevated copy protection on those particular discs, so I don't think that there is a fix to make blue discs work in K3B. However, if I do end up finding or figuring out an issue to this, I'll pin a comment with the steps that I took to get it to work. But for now, we can just assume that blue discs are unsupported and won't work using this method, so just stick to your standard game discs for now. Okay, so we can see here that the game was successfully ripped with no issues in just under 10 minutes. If we navigate and look in our PS2 games folder on the SD card, we can see that the game file is right here, Soul Calibur 2. Then if we open up the properties on that file, we can see that the file size is just about 4 gigabytes, which is roughly the same as the file size that we saw earlier before getting started. So we can assume that all of our game data was copied successfully. If you're following along and just finished dumping your first game, I suggest pausing here and trying to run the file using your emulator of choice, just to verify that the game image was properly dumped and can be read. We'll go ahead and do that now. So let's safely eject the SD card and take this over to our testing bench. Alright, so after inserting the SD card into my handheld emulator and giving it a second to wake up, I'll navigate to the PS2 games list via the front end. For those of you who care, this handheld is the Anbernic RG406H, and the PS2 emulator app that I'll be using is Nver SX2. If you're interested in learning more about this specific console and its capabilities, I highly recommend the reviews from Retro Game Core and VladNerd. They didn't know that I was going to plug them here, but I'll go ahead and put links to their videos in the description for this one, as well as a link to where you can find the console if you're interested. Anyway, we can see that the game that we just ripped to our SD card is right there, Soul Calibur 2, and if we open it, it boots right up into the game with no issues. Always fun remembering that the control layout for Sony and PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 is different from Nintendo, which is what the actual physical layout of the console itself is. And apologies for the audio clipping that's about to happen here. I wasn't expecting the intro to be quite as exciting as it turned out to be, and it maxed out the rinky-dink little mic on my camera.
Transcending history and the world, a tale of souls and swords, eternally retold.
So there you go. Now you can follow these steps to convert your PS2 games library into digital format, or use it to rip just about any other type of game file. That way you can preserve your games and digitally emulate them on aftermarket hardware. If you've made it this far and found the video helpful, please like the video so that others can find it more easily. And if you know of a solution to the blue disc problem, please leave a comment to help myself and other PS2 gamers out. Thank you for watching, and GG's.